thank you very much for having me. I am Melanie Patrick, and after this short session, you will be able to handle Git like a master builder. So, quick question. Is there anyone who does not use Git? Wait, I can't see you. Is there anyone who does not use Git? No. No. Anyone who has used Git, run into problems and used more than a couple of hours? Yeah. So I guess so. Some people. Okay. I'll go back here. There we go. So a little disclaimer. If you're a beginner, don't try to understand everything. The slides are online and can be used as cheat sheets. I use them myself. This is all based on personal style and experience, on my live real examples, and there's always more than one way to do things in programming, so that many things are up for discussion. And please ask your questions right after a topic, and please unmute yourself, because I cannot watch the chat at the same time. That's too much for me. Okay, so I was an international secretary at the Boston Consulting Group for 11 years. I speak 4 languages. I spent some time in New Zealand, and in 2011, I decided to turn my life completely around and become a PHP developer. Yeah, I work at Trivago. We do mainly the A/B test handling suite and internal administration tools. But when I started as a complete newbie in 2013 at Trivago, my colleague sat next to me and said, we will do Git on the command line, because the command line is the only place where you can run all the Git commands. Most GUIs only implement a subset of functionalities, and many are a matter of taste. And if you know how to run the Git version, the command line version, you maybe can figure out what the GUI actually does in the background. And all users have now command line tools installed and available. So when I first started, and my colleague Sebastian sat next to me, he told me to write stuff like git pull and git push, and I was thinking, git push to where, and git add to what, and yeah, that was basically what I was thinking. So I used Git like I guess almost anyone does, like blindly use those commands. And at some point, I ran into more problems, and then I decided to read the whole documentation, and the documentation kind of filled in the blanks. So this kind of make these layers that connect those Git commands, that made the most sense to me. So now git add now really means for me Git added to the stage. So this is, as you can see, I'm a very visual person. Git consists of the workspace, the stage, sometimes it's also called index, the local repository, and the remote repository. I brought pictures. So the workspace, you can imagine like your actual desk. The stage, you can imagine like a packaging station where you wrap everything up. The local repository is like the shelf behind you where you have all your cool models to look at. And the remote repository is where everyone can see your cool models. And a pro tip, if you're setting up your own Git, use an actual remote location for the remote repository and not on the same laptop, because if the hard drive dies, it's all lost. And I'm not making this up. This happened to someone I know. If you just want to look around, you can use git diff. And those are the now also the various git diff flags make sense to me, because now I know the git diff, the normal one that you usually use, is what is the difference between the stage and the workspace. And by the way, I use this orange little flag to signify command line flag, and the one that I use most is -w, because that is ignoring all white space. So you have, if you have this, kind of war going on between you with tops versus spaces or something like that, you can see the differences of someone else's code without seeing all the white space. We will talk about this head thingy later. Are there any questions so far? Okay. So this is a regular workflow for me. You pull a branch or the main branch, and when you're done working, you add all the files with git add dot. You add all of the files, then you commit, and then you push. And actually, I was thinking for a long time what a commit actually is. And I found a real world example in the most odd of all places, and that is knitting. So, for example, in knitting, when you drop a stitch, everything will ladder down and unravel. But if you put in like this red string, in knitting we call it lifeline, then the unraveling is stopped. And this is basically, I compare this to a git commit, because I put in a git commit when I think everything is working, everything is fine, the number is right. And when I go on, then I can safely experiment. I can, destroy things. And if it's bad, I can just go back to my commit or lifeline. So as a ground rule, I use, I commit every time something works. Every time I go, yay, then I know it's a good time to do a commit. So imagine you're at the end of the day, you just finished your feature, you want to push it and merge it to the main, and then the push doesn't work because there are conflicts. Such a merge I find always very stressful, and I recommend to use a merge tool. By the way, also the Git documentation recommends to use a graphical merge tool. And this is such a stressful situation, and it requires the willpower of a superhero to solve this. So what I like to use instead is to use a stash. This you can imagine like a drawer in your desk where you can quickly hide some stuff while you work on other more important things. And by the way, stash -u means you can also include untracked files in your stash, which is very handy to not accidentally commit some files. So branches, I guess everyone knows how to use branches. I recommend using git branch minus merge from time to time, so your drive doesn't get cluttered. Git branch shows you all the branches, and I usually do a branch for every feature. And the head is a variable pointing to a specific commit. This can change, and this isn't related to a branch. So if you quickly want to change between branches, you can type git checkout and the branch name. And to quickly change back and forth, you can just use git checkout minus. This saves you a ton of typing. To To quickly create a new branch, you can type git checkout -b and then your new branch name. And also from experience, it's good to merge the main master in quite often, especially if you have a big team and they are developing very fast. Otherwise, the branches can diverge very, very much. And in the end, it's super painful to merge them back together. So if you want to go back in time, which means put the head at some other point except the end of the branch, then you can use git checkout and an ID or git checkout head. This means you will be in a detached head state. You can look around, you can make some experimental changes, you can even commit them, but you cannot push them, and you will have to create an extra branch for that. So what I showed you is all what you can see in the git log. And if you use git log graph and on one line, you can see an actual graphical representation of what happened in your history and how the branches move together and away from each other. So let's talk a little bit about this head notation, because I always got super confused when I went on Stack Overflow and looked for some answers on Git problems. And there was always some kind of different annotation with head, and I found it, yeah, super irritating, super confusing, and I never knew what it meant. So I just basically had to trust what someone was writing. So git checkout ~head references to the commit one before head. So let's imagine, can you see my mouse?
Yes.
Yes. So this is our head, let's say, and ~1 is the commit one before the head. It's pretty straightforward. Check out circumflex head 1 means of the head. So let's imagine this is our head, and it has one parent, but it also has another parent. And this can get a little bit, yeah, confusing. So I recommend using the git reflog. And the reflog means you have a super detailed history of where your head went through. So if you want to move the head around, you can use a git reset. So that means just going back from one point and going back, yeah, one step in this case. And so a hard reset means that you remove one commit and all work, and all your uncommitted changes are lost forever. And a soft reset undoes one commit, puts back the work from that commit in your workspace, so it looks like uncommitted changes. Everyone's good so far? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. So when you ran into something, I hear an echo now. Okay. So imagine you have a really bad day, you didn't have enough sleep, you're running a little bit late, you just had half a cup of coffee, and you come into the office and you're greeted that you need to do an urgent bug fix. And of course, you just started working in the main branch. So an easy solution for that would be to just use git checkout b, as we discussed before, or use a git stash and check out an already existing branch, and then a git stash pop. And in your hurry, you had a typo in your branch name, so you can easily rename your newly created branch. Please don't use this on a branch that you already pushed, because chances are that someone already saw it and pulled it. And never ever do this on a branch where a pull request exists. When you retrieve a stash and you already pulled from a main, sometimes that causes conflicts. So if you do a git stash pop, you can also do then a soft reset. And Git is very, very clever and does not drop your stash once you run into errors. Thank you for the music. Sometimes also your stash is super, super old, but you cracked a really nifty problem there, so you really want to have it back. With git stash list, I'm sorry. With git stash list, you can see all your stashes. And you can see in the second line with the git stash, this is the same way of annotating as the head notation. So this is, if you remember one, you can also remember the other one. So then you can see the contents of the stash. And from there, you can even create a whole new branch and then merge some other branch in. Maybe you staged a file and it needs to be ignored. So most possible a config local file with your database password that should never ever be committed. And you've already put now the file into the git ignore, but it's still there. And how is it possible to get Git to untrack this file? Because you cannot see it in if you type git status. So you need to type a git rm ---- staged and then the file name, and it removes the file from tracking. And do not forget the ---- staged, because otherwise it will actually delete your file. I had a situation with my colleague Janine, and we were trying to be nice and merge a branch for a colleague who was just on vacation. But the changes were so massive, and we couldn't tell from those changes which one was their side or outside or the right side. So we decided to just abort the merge. I know that was not very nice for this colleague, but yeah, we decided at that point that we couldn't do it. It also happens that we sometimes have typos in commit messages, or let's be more honest. It's not a typo, it's just you quickly typed something and you want to change that because you don't want this in your Git history. So you can do a commit amend, so you can change your last commit message. Also, before you do an amend, you can also add another file in case you forgot one. So I guess that happens to quite often. Well, at least in my first developing years, this happened to me very often. And the way to undo this is to do a git revert. And if you can see this representation, you basically create a new commit that undoes everything in your last commit, and you're retrieving the status from the one before. And this is Git's safest and most basic undo scenario, because it doesn't really change the history. Because changing history is always a little bit of a tricky thing. This also happened to me if I worked on too many things on the same time, that I committed and pushed also to the wrong branch, because I like to always push my things, because I see the remote repository as my kind of backup, because my machine can always die or fall down. I have a 3-year-old kid, so there's always a possibility. And one way to resolve is to actually check out the wrong branch, do a soft reset, stash those changes, check out the branch you actually want those this commit in, retrieve your stash, commit it, push it to origin, and then check out the wrong branch and do a force origin. Force origin is, yeah, also a bit of a tricky thing. Do never ever push force on the main branch, or if others have checked out your branch, because those colleagues won't like you anymore. If you have a good admin, the main branch is protected, so you cannot do a force push on there. And make sure that no one else has committed to that original branch, or your changes will be lost. The other way to do is to use a cherry pick. So you can pick a single commit from another branch and put it into another. Everyone's good so far? Okay. But what do you do if you do not need a whole commit from another branch, but just one file? So I had I needed some configuration file from another branch that someone started, a colleague started, and usually you don't want to branch of another branch, because this gets complicated in the end, and you need to communicate and see which branch merges first before the other. And this, yeah, just in most cases, unless you really know what you do, branch of main branch. But you can check out a single file or even a whole folder from another branch, but be careful, because your local changes will be overwritten. So this is a good thing to use if you just started a new branch, a new project, and want to copy over the files from the other branch. Also, I had at one point, we were switching from Vagrant to Docker. So I needed some changes from another branch from a colleague, but as said, I do not like to branch of another branch. So I merged the other branch. I did looked into the reflog and looked what my colleague did, went back to my to my point where I started and did a soft reset. So I would have his changes, and then I would commit then I would add with -p, which means I would do a patch commit. And a patch is super cool because you don't commit all the changes in one file, but you can select almost line by line, or in hunks they call it, like bits of code. So basically, yeah, if you type git add -p, Git will ask you this whole thing, and I can never remember what it means, but I can remember Y for yes and N for no and question mark for print the help. This is what I always do. That was a funny situation. So my colleague Jakob came to me and told me, yeah, I have this branch and it's called composer.json, and I cannot check it out because there's a file named composer.json, and when I type git check out composer.json, it would always check out the file instead of the branch. So you can name branches basically anything. You could even name them head in capitals. Don't, because I think hell will break loose. But what we found out with Jakob together is if you type git checkout composer.json and then minus minus, it will check out the branch, because minus minus means for Git that there comes a specification for a file, but we don't give one. So composer.json in this case must be the branch name. So someone used accidentally a hard reset, and now the last commit is gone, and it was a super important commit. And here's where the ref log comes in. So the ref log was the super detailed logging where you can see where the head went through. And here you can see, here was the hard reset done. In the log, my super important commit isn't there. But if I type git ref log, I can see still my super important commit. Ooh, and then I can do a reset on this ID. And then my super important commit is back there. Still, my untracked changes are lost forever, but at least my super important commit is back. Okay, danger zone, changing history. One of our colleagues, that really happened to him, he accidentally committed and pushed a password. This is obviously something you should never do. And as soon as that happens, obviously you change your password, you delete it from wherever you can, and then you try to change the Git history. And I will not go through all of this because this is really tedious. This is very error prone. The suggestion is to do a dry run first, and then there's dangling commits, so commits that do not belong to any branch. So this is one version. I personally prefer the nuclear option. So this means deleting everything. So delete the whole repository. The cool thing is all of your history is gone, so all traces of your password is gone. The bad thing is your history is gone. So if you have an especially old repository, that might be uncool. But the cool thing is if you have a repository on GitHub, even if you delete everything and create a new repo with the same name, you will keep your stars. So if someone else changed the Git history, there's a few things one can do. So some people like to use a rebase. Some people used to like to use a hard reset. And as you might imagine, I'm the one for the clean slate. I usually just delete my whole folder and clone it again. There's a lot of ways to configure Git. I personally don't use the bash prompt, but the Zosh one, and I use this Joff Garside theme, so I can see which folder I'm in and in which branch I am, and this little star means that I'm in a dirty branch. That means there are untracked files. Also, I can see the files that are untracked, and I also have auto-completion, things that Bash doesn't usually get you. Also, I like to configure my global Git config file. So I like to ignore some usual Mac files like the DS store or like my PHP Storm settings file. Some people don't like to use Vim, so they use Atom. You can configure your merge tool. And what I personally use the most is a standard default commit message. So I always have to start my commit messages with these four letters. It's not much, but at least I don't have to type those four. And my personal favorite one is the help autocorrect. And this means if I type very quickly and accidentally have a typo in my Git command, it will wait for 5 seconds and then tell you what, in the meantime, tell you what it thinks that you might have meant, and then execute it. And of course, you can abort any command with Control-C. So to wrap it up, use the command line. As says, commit early, commit often. Try not to push when you notice your error, because unpushed errors are much easier to fix. And keep calm, because almost anything can be undone. I hope you feel happy now. Thank you very much.